that he's done. But I think that's a misreading of this story. You see, the first century customs that we receive from the Hebrew thinkers, from the rabbis, is that was a Jewish boy to lose the family's inheritance amongst the Gentiles, the non-Jews, and then were he to dare to return home, the community, the village, would gather around him. They would pick up a large clay pot. They would smash it in front of him. And they would say, so-and-so is cut off from their people. Because this is the exact same response that Pharaoh in the Old Testament had when Moses would come and confront him and say, let God's people go. There would be a plague, accused and deceived when it comes to the heart of God and the Christian gospel. And they make the terrible mistake of believing that God's love and his acceptance and his forgiveness and our entrance into his family and his sons and daughters is something that can be earned by human works. This religious attitude is poisonous. And yet, even still, once we've exhausted all other options, this is at the root of the human heart. We don't want to receive grace. We want to earn our own way back in. We want to restore our own reputation. And there's a play in words here. I don't know whether you notice it, but when the younger son says, I will arise and go to my father, behind our language again in this Greek term, anastasis, arise. Do you know what word they use for Jesus getting up from the grave? Anastasis. Jesus arose. Jesus resurrected. This son, having shamed his father, left the nation, lost the inheritance, squandered his life, dissipated everything, wasted it away, comes up with a face-saving plan that he will resurrect his own reputation. And the text continues. But while he was still a long way, because the story says that he was watching on the horizon. He wasn't aloof. He was watching, searching that distant horizon just for a glimpse of his son. And then Jesus described that the Father is stirred by compassion. We don't have a word that is fitting to describe what is going on here in Hebrew thought. It literally speaks about the deepest parts, the deepest feeling parts of the human being torn apart. This deep feeling that causes you to do something, to respond. And it says that stirred by compassion, the Father runs. He bolts. It's the technical term in Greek that was used to describe Olympians in the foot races, whether in Athens in the Olympic stadiums or whether at the Isthmian Games outside the nation, the city of Corinth village. He did it so that none of the words of the villagers would turn his son away. The father is so deeply saddened at the thought that my son is stumbling home. And if he gets here, and if he finds nothing but judgmental people, maybe he'll turn and walk away. How many people in their experience of the church, in their encounters with Christians, have been turned away from the loving embrace of God our Father because of the judgmental attitude of those who claim to be his children? The Father gets around it. He will have none of that. He will not let there be a chance for his son to be turned away. No one is going to injure him further. He's going to reconcile his son to himself. Now, it's impossible to ever capture the full glory and mystery of what Christians believe, that God became human. That God left heaven's joys and comforts to come and experience shame and scorn and betrayal and suffering on earth. No story, no parable can capture that multifaceted diamond of beautiful truths. And yet this unparalleled story, at least it gives us a window into what happens here. Because the Father in this parable, it represents God. And when God leaves the house to take upon himself this humiliating posture, that is itself a symbol of God incarnate, leaving heaven's joys to face earth's woes. He doesn't wait for the prodigal son to come to him and to beg. We cannot climb our way up to heaven to God. Instead, he comes down on a rescue mission to willingly retrieve, to seek and to save those who are lost. He comes down and he bears the cost. And this costly demonstration of love in the village streets, well, this in some part demonstrates the glory of the cross of Jesus Christ. You see, as the Father runs, the village would have followed. And what happens next is in full view of everyone when the Father kisses his Son. And the Greek term implies that he does it continuously. It's like a grandma getting a little 2-year-old toddler. Will not let him go. It's like me with my son after I've been away on a long trip. I just don't want to let him go. And he embraced him, pulls him in close. And you can imagine the shock of the prodigal. He's afraid of judgment, and yet he only encounters the Father's love. And here is the part of the story where his heart is finally melted, where he really gets it for the first time, where he understands a love that had always been there, but he'd just never been able to see it. He'd refused to open his eyes. And so overwhelmed by this Father's love, he throws himself completely on the Father's mercy. Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. You wait for his words. And the son realizes here that his sin wasn't so much that he'd lost the money. Does God really care that much about money? But that he'd broken the Father's heart. He destroyed that relationship. And he damaged others in the process. And this really was the first sign of true repentance. And this is what an encounter with God will do to you. When you encounter God's love, you come to recognize the depths of your own evils, the sins. And you come to realize that even though God knows you to the depths, even though he sees what you've done, even though he knows what was happening behind those closed doors or in the privacy where you thought no one else was watching, in the thoughts and the feelings that you have hidden away deep down that you would never dare express, he knows you to the depths, and yet he still loves you to the skies.